And welcome back, everybody. Robert Durst, the 78-year-old convicted murderer, died of natural causes on Monday morning. The real estate heir was sentenced this past October to life in prison following his murder conviction of Susan Berman. Now, Durst was in the California healthcare facility awaiting his transfer to New York, where he was to face the indictment for the murder of his wife, Kathleen Durst. And Kathy went missing back in 1982, and the case was officially reopened on November 1st, 2021. We have with us a very special guest this morning who knows all things Robert Durst, Kary Antholis, publisher of the podcast Jury Duty, the Trial of Robert Durst. And Kary was able to interview lead prosecutor in the Robert Durst case, in Susan Berman's case, John Lewin. I want to start right there. We're going to play you some clips. During the interview, Kary asked Lewin about his reaction to the death of Robert Durst, and here's what he had to say.
If you kind of think about it, Bob lived 50 years longer than Kathy. He lived 20 years longer than Susan. So I think in the end, he was very lucky to have lived to an age where he could succumb to the various medical problems that were independent of his criminality, and which, you know, all of us suffer from.
Now, before I introduce Kary, we want to hear John Lewin again, his reaction to the fact that now that Durst is dead, his guilty verdict will most likely be vacated, thrown out. Take a look.
I think there are probably some good reasons, some good arguments you can make that a verdict reached by a jury should be final for the purposes of a conviction. But that's what the law is, and it's not my position to dispute or argue with what the law is. The law is the law.
Now the man himself, Kary Antholis, great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. So I'm going to ask you two questions here. One, what is your reaction to the death of Robert Durst? And two, how would you overall describe John Lewin's reaction to this major news this past week?
Well, it was not a huge surprise. Many of us were wondering whether Durst would make it to trial, let alone make it through essentially 2-year trial process. And I must say I share a lot of John Lewin's thinking on this. You know, he lived a very selfish life, and he caused a lot of pain to a lot of people. He betrayed those people who were closest to him, and so I personally am glad that he was able to see justice served. Lewin's reaction was very stoic, and he, you know, he said later in that interview, he said that he, in his 30 years as a prosecutor, has never seen a witness take the stand and perjure himself so relentlessly as he saw in Robert Durst. You know, it is, by the way, Mr. Lewin began his statement by saying any death is a tragedy. It is, you know, we regret the loss of life, the loss of human life. But in the end, I think John Lewin and I both agree that justice was served in this case, and irrespective of whether the jury verdict is vacated against Robert Durst, it was fitting to see justice served, and I think we're all glad that he made it through the trial in order to see that he couldn't get away with murder.
That's what's so incredible about it. It was only a few months' time. If this happened just a few months ago, he could have died in the middle of trial and there wouldn't have been a result. So it is incredible that this happened, that he died really at the last possible second. We go back, though, to prosecutor John Lewin, and he clearly had a lot more thoughts about Robert Durst. Let's take a listen.
Well, when you're dealing with someone who is, you know, a narcissistic psychopath, that's what Bob Durst is, you really can't expect them to do anything because it's the right thing to do. They have to have their own interest and motivation. I know, because I've interviewed him, I know that Bob is concerned that he's getting older. I know that, like everybody, when you get to an advanced age, you start to think about your impending death and what that's going to mean and who you're going to be accountable for. So I had hoped that maybe in the face of this, he would feel compelled to say something, because the only thing he has left to give are the answers that only he has. And no matter what verdict we have, it's not the same as him actually admitting what he's done. So no, I was not surprised. I was not especially hopeful. I was disappointed, but that's what we would have expected.
Given it was brought up several times now, John, has there ever or is there ever any kind of arrangement, plea deal, some kind of offer that can be made to get him to give up the location of capital remains, or that should be sold?
Well, so at this point in time, he's been sentenced. We had hoped that possibly there might be something that could have been done much earlier in this proceeding. There was never any offer. The offer was admit what you did and admit that you did it because it's the right thing to do. That's what I told him in New Orleans. That's what I tried to bring up when he testified. And in the end, the kind of appeal to his better nature and to his conscience, it didn't happen.
Kary, when I view John Lewin, I always see him up against Robert Durst, these kind of two foes. I mean, I saw them initially in the 2015 interrogation tape, then the so many days of cross-examination. Did Lewin speak to you about what it was like to kind of battle Robert Durst on the other side, to be face-to-face with him during this kind of questioning?
He didn't get into it in any great depth in this conversation, Jesse. But my sense is that John Lewin believes that Robert Durst was building up for the big show. He believed that he was going to outdo Lewin in the courtroom. And in some respects, it's quite possible that Robert Durst willed himself through the various maladies he had to get his own moment on the witness stand. And there's, some measure of solace in the fact that by all accounts, and certainly by the jury's verdict, he was outdone by John Lewin on the witness stand in the 9 days of interrogation that he was subject to by John Lewin.
Well, let me ask you this. And any indication, because I've always said that John Lewin, I thought his case was tremendous. It was so fantastic, so thorough. He really did know this case so well. Did you get any indication if Lewin was going to help New York prosecutors in helping to prosecute Durst in New York?
I mean, I'm sure John Lewin would have provided New York anything that they needed in terms of evidence, but I got no sense of particular cooperation with New York. And by the way, Jesse, I don't think that the New York prosecutors ever thought they would bring Robert Durst to trial. I think that they got that once the conviction was secured in Los Angeles, they made sure to get the indictment out there so that it was on the record, and I think they fully expected Robert Durst to die long before they could move forward with that prosecution, if they even had a plan to bring that prosecution at all.
But the story, is not over. In fact, there is another point in your interview that is incredible. But everyone out there, we're not going to play it just yet. We're going to take a quick break. You should stay with us, because on the other side, Lewin is asked a really important question, and you got to listen to it to believe it. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So we're still talking about the death of Robert Durst, the man convicted of murdering Susan Berman, a trial that we covered here on Law and Crime. And with us is Kary Antholis, the publisher of the podcast Jury Duty, the Trial of Robert Durst. Kary had an opportunity to speak with prosecutor John Lewin, the man who prosecuted Robert Durst. We all saw it in real time. And I want to play this portion. This is absolutely incredible, where prosecutor Lewin, this is his response to allegations made by Robert Abrams that the Durst organization and others were involved in covering up Kathy's murder. Now, this is very important because after Robert Durst died, Abrams actually released a statement saying the investigation continues. They're going to continue moving forward against people who might have covered this up. He's an attorney for the McCormick family. Listen to what Lewin had to say.
Evidence in the case, and I worked on this case for more than 8 years. I think I know it probably better than anybody else in the world. There is no evidence, none whatsoever, that anyone other than Bob Durst killed Kathy Durst, disposed of her body, murdered Susan Berman, murdered Morris Black, and disposed of his body. No evidence that anyone participated, planned, or assisted in any of those crimes.
Kary, what do you make of that, in the sense that you have one side saying that there's more to the story, there are people who helped Robert Durst to cover up the murders, and then you have John Lewin saying it's all on Durst, Robert Durst?
Well, I think part of this is that, in my view, Abrams made some irresponsible allegations in his complaint and in his subsequent press conference or Zoom conference about the conspiracy, not just involving the Durst organization, but also involving the LA prosecutor's office, that there was some sort of nefarious deal reached. And I think that John Lewin has been criticized for being pugnacious and long-winded, but the one thing that I can attest to in my viewing that trial for over 3 years, that all of the proceedings for over 3 years, 4 years probably, is that John Lewin is extremely ethical, extremely concerned with doing the right thing, following the law, following procedure. And the idea that someone in New York, in Kathy Durst's name, the person for whom John Lewin, part of the process that John Lewin was doing was to get a conviction that not only was for Susan Berman's murder, but implicitly was for Kathy Durst and Morris Black's murder as well, is the idea that he would be accused of somehow dirty dealing. My opinion is that gets under John Lewin's skin. And so he was being very crystal clear of what he found in this, to put to rest any opportunity that Bob Abrams may have to spread his lies.
And there were people outside of Douglas Durst. There were people who testified, friends of Robert Durst, right? And people who you suspected might have had more information than they were letting on. Did Lewin address that at all? Because, you know, there were these people who when he was cross-examining them, it seemed that they weren't being totally transparent.
Well, he did not. I mean, I did ask him, well, of course, Susan Berman was an accessory after the fact. But even in that instance, he believes that Robert Durst never told Susan Berman he killed Kathy Durst. He believes that he told Susan Berman that there was some sort of accident, and he gave her as little information as he needed to. And my sense is that that's the case with all of the people around Robert Durst, whether it's Susie Giordano or Gene Smith. He gave them as little information as he needed to, and he let their own instincts drive them on how to help Bob. You know, the spell that he cast over people is a bit of a mystery to me, but but I don't. I tend to see it the way that John Lewin presents it, which is that Bob Durst would only give as much information as he needed to get what he needed, and that's it. And people would act for him, out of their own motivations, but they would do it with very limited information.
Well, you were just mentioning how Susan Berman, helped to cover up after the fact, and there was testimony about this. Several of Susan's friends had testified that she admitted to helping Bob in one way or another, and she told one friend in particular that if anything ever happened to her, Bob did it. Let's go to that testimony from Miriam Barnes.
Did you ask her any questions while she was telling you what she had to tell you?
No.
Why not?
Susan asked you to ask her any questions. You didn't ask her any questions.
You kind of laughed when you said that. Tell us why you're laughing. What do you mean by that?
And nerves. She was very definite. When she, and very focused when she wanted to be. And when she was asking for something, she was a definite person.
Okay. So she told you, I'm going to tell you something. I need you not to ask me any questions.
Mm-hmm.
And you listened to what she had to say. You didn't ask her any questions.
Yes, I listened to what she had to say.
Okay. When you sat down, what did she say?
She said to me, I did something today.
Did she tell you whether she'd done it on her own or whether someone had asked her to do something?
She said she did it for Bobby.
Okay. How did she say that? What did she say?
She was, it took her a while to get it out. She was very nervous. And when Susan got nervous, she would pick at her lip. And she said, I did something today and did it for Bobby. And then her next statement was, if anything ever happened to me, Bobby did it.
While she was saying this, you said she was picking on her lip?
Yeah.
Had you noticed that habit in her previously?
Yeah.
Under what circumstances during previous encounters you had with her would she pick her lip?
That was part of her, but when she would get nervous or wanted very serious, she would do this picking at her lip.
How certain are you that Susan said, Bobby asked me to do something and I did something today?
It's certain, very certain.
Do you have any doubt in your mind that she said that to you?
No.
How certain are you as you sit here today that Susan said, if something happens, Susan said, if something happens, Bobby did it?
I'm very certain.
Kary, did Lewin, or even your interpretation of the trial, it seemed again that people knew Susan Berman might have helped him in a way, or that she knew more, they had more information, and everybody who doesn't know so much about this case is wondering, why did it take so many years for him to go to trial? Did Lewin address that at all in your conversation with him?
Not particularly, but it was very difficult to build this case. And in fact, at one point back in 2015, Robert Durst said to Charles Bagley, the reporter for the New York Times, who also helped us cover the trial at jury duty, said to him, I just don't see a big budget busting I just don't see a big budget busting prosecution having the political capital to be able to pull off a prosecution against me. It was basically laying down the gauntlet. And that was like, John Lewin was already 2 years into his investigation into Robert Durst. And it was just a few weeks away from interviewing Robert Durst in a jail cell in New Orleans. It's, after the Texas prosecution and after the acquittal in that trial, it was difficult to imagine anybody bringing Robert Durst back into a courtroom. And it was only because of Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling that the evidence was developed that allowed the LA prosecutors to make a run at a prosecution.
And Kary, we have about a little over a minute. Your thoughts on Douglas Durst's comments that Bob lived a sad, painful, and tragic life. We hope his death brings some closure to those he hurt.
Yes, I'm sure that echoes the sentiments of his Bob Durst's other brother, Thomas Durst. There was a lot of pain in that family. There was a lot of pain after their mother's death, but Bob was Bob was one of the central causes of pain in that family, that organization, and in all the people around him.
Yeah, and that's where it's a weird feeling, right? Because like you said, and like Lewin said, any death's a tragedy, but at the same time, this is a guy who really inflicted so much pain, and it might have taken so many years, but he was brought to justice right before his death, which is incredible to watch and incredible to see. Kary Antholis, thank you so much for coming on. Great interview with John Lewin. If you want to check out Kary's podcast, again, it's Jury Duty, the trial of Robert Durst. And hopefully we can have you back again, Kary, to talk more about this case if you interview more people in connection with the trial. So thank you so much, Kary. Everyone out there,
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you everyone for joining us for the last three hours as we've broken down all of these important cases, including Chandler Halderson. I am going to be signing off. You're in great hands. Bob Bianchi is up next. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back.